So this is both the first Sunday of Advent and World AIDS Day, transferred from Friday. We're doing it tonight. And it's a great convergence in some ways of a season that begins where we look forward toward the incarnation, the birth of Jesus Christ, because I do believe that there is no incarnation, no meaningful incarnation, no celebration of the Word made flesh without a time of preparation. That's what Advent is. And also World AIDS Day is a time where we also stop, take stock, think back, remember, reflect about where we've been, and also look forward to a time when we will, in the words of our AIDS conversation today, get to zero. There will be no more AIDS, no more dying there, no more crying there. I believe that. On the first Sunday of Advent, we are looking forward not only to the birth of Jesus Christ on Christmas, but we're also looking forward with the whole church toward an end to time, a return of Christ, a vindication. You know, in liberal Protestantism, we don't like to talk too much about the second coming of Christ. And I remember that my friend Bishop Yvette Flunder and I used to terrorize the people at the liberal seminary where we worked, Pacific School of Religion, by saying that we believed in Jesus Christ crucified. They would go with that. Resurrected, they started to get nervous, and coming again. And then the liberal Christianity that we espouse there, and I do believe in liberal Christianity, would get a little nervous because we just were a little uncomfortable thinking about Jesus Christ returning at the end of time. But I think it's useful for us to remember that Jesus will return, that there will be some kind of vindication. Unfortunately, conservative Christianity has co-opted it to make us think of it as a terrible time of judgment, something we should be afraid of. But I want to urge us to think about Advent as a time of looking forward to Jesus' return, as well as Jesus' birth at Christmas time, not as something to be afraid of, but as something to embrace, anticipate, expect. When Jesus, the incarnation of love, the Word made flesh, will say to us, "Servants of God, well done. Good job. Thank you for being faithful. Thank you for being loved in my stead." And we'll be able to say, particularly to communities like metropolitan community churches, in regard to days like World AIDS Day, you know, I thought I could trust the church to take care of people with AIDS. I'm so glad I gathered metropolitan community churches to take care of LGBT people in the 1960s and 70s, so that there would be someone to take care of people with HIV and AIDS in the 1980s and 90s, because I thought I could trust the church to do it. But they didn't do such a great job. But I knew I could trust the gays to do it. Because when you want something done well, you turn to people who have experienced discrimination and marginalization and oppression. And there are other examples of this in history. But today I want to just remember and lift up this history on World AIDS Day and the MCC example at the Metropolitan Community Church of Boston as something that we did and did well. We were faithful. And so when we think about a return of Christ, and I think this has broader application, but remember I'm here at MCC Boston and I want to say something to us about us in particular. We don't need to fear a return of Christ. It can be comforting to us to think that left in charge, in Jesus' absence, we knew what to do. People who have experienced marginalization and oppression know what to do in the face of other people experiencing it. We don't turn away. We say, how can we help to make a difference? So the early Christians were looking forward to a return of Jesus. That's why we at the beginning of Advent think about not just the birth of Jesus. You know, the first gospel, Mark's gospel, that we look at on the first Sunday of Advent this year, doesn't have any shepherds, doesn't have any angels. There's no Mary and Joseph in Mark's gospel. These are people who were being persecuted. And they weren't so interested in the baby Jesus story, but they were expecting a vindication. And that's what they were focusing on. They weren't looking towards the Christmas carols that, we are familiar with, but they were expecting somehow some kind of return of Christ, some kind of expression of solidarity, of a divine indication that their suffering mattered, that somebody noticed. And that's what we see reflected in this text that is about the end of the world. Sometimes endings are beginnings, and sometimes when things are falling apart, that's when we're most able to see the divine presence breaking in. And sometimes that's when our best selves are evoked. I'd like to think it's not necessary for that to happen, but this story reminds us that when all manner of things are thus being dissolved, when it feels like things are coming to an end, that's when we are reminded that it isn't so much that we're waiting for God, but that God is with us in the waiting. So we start Advent not yet with the shepherds, not yet with the angels, not yet even with an angel saying, "Don't be afraid." But we start with these kind of terrifying passages where the earth is changed and where there is suffering talked about and where we are promised that there will be a return and where we are given advice about how to navigate difficult times. Stay awake, pay attention. Don't ignore the signs that are around you. Signs that can be cautionary signs, but also signs that bring promise of blessing. If we focus only on how it's going to end, at the end, we might miss what's available to us in the process of getting there. We start in the Christian year looking at the end of time, but it is also a beginning. T.S. Eliot, in the Four Quartets, what we call the beginning is often the end. And to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time. We can't be afraid of what feels like endings or change. This is where the Advent journey begins, in uncertainty, in times where it feels like things are falling apart, where we don't know exactly how it will end, but with an expectation that there will be not only revelation, but incarnation, God's presence made real to us at the very end. We will get to the angels and the shepherds, I promise. There will be Mary and Joseph in just a few weeks. But right now, the sun is dark. The moon is not giving its light. Stars are falling from the heavens. Powers in the heavens are shaking. Scholars call this passage in Mark's gospel the little apocalypse. And I like that because I have a little apocalypse at least once a day. I don't know about you. And I will tell you, when I was diagnosed with AIDS in 1995, it felt like not just a little apocalypse, but a big apocalypse. I remember the day it happened. I'd already been in the hospital for a month. Everybody already knew, but me, that I had AIDS. I'd been in a coma. I was not necessarily expected to survive. I knew that. MCC people will appreciate this because Troy Perry had been to visit me. And that was a bad sign because he lived in Los Angeles and I was in San Francisco. So when you are in a kind of a half comatose state and you look up and you see Troy Perry there, in those days that meant, oh, I must be really sick. And it was hard to come out of that coma. I remember that. If you've ever been in a coma, you know what this is like. It's like trying to break out of a dream or coming up from underwater. I remember the things that people said to me or about me in their presence. So be careful what you say around people. And I did not think I would survive. And I have to say, every day since then, I do say this as a prayer or a surprise exclamation when I open my eyes. Still here. Sometimes that's the only prayer I can manage, but it's a prayer of gratitude ultimately, even when things are not going well. It is a prayer, a spontaneous prayer of, still here, not yet finished. It felt like an apocalypse, though, that I had done something wrong and terrible, and I had been an AIDS activist already for many years, which made it even worse, because, quote, I should have known better. And not only did I think that, I had plenty of my friends to tell me that too. Really, Jim? You should have known better. Thank you, I felt like saying, and sometimes I did say it. And my anger also became a way of feeling better and overcoming my paralysis around my little apocalypse that I was having. I learned what Jesus advised people here. Pay attention. Do not let what is unfolding around you become an excuse for not engaging, not listening, ignoring, burying your head in the sand. Watch, pay attention. Jesus says, from the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branches become tender and put forth its leaves, you will know that summer is near. You know what? I love that because it's not a death image. It's not a dying image. It is a promise image. It isn't about winter coming. It's about summer coming. We used to say in AIDS work, I remember this in MCC San Francisco, in the worst years of the 80s, when so many people were dying, they would say to us, journalists would come and interview our little church. As they said, what's it like to be in a church where, and in a community where so many people are dying? Must be depressing. And we would say, well, it's like autumn. I remember being interviewed and saying this and seeing it in print. Bright, beautiful colors of autumn. Just before the leaves die, but there is brilliance and there is life, even in the last days. And that was true. But then I also remember taking comfort from these very verses where Jesus says, look for the tender leaves, because it tells you that summer is coming. Even in the midst of death, or certain death, or impending death, there is the possibility of life. Look for the signs of life all the time. While you're waiting, while you're watching, look for life. So I want to tell you about some signs I've been reading lately that all my years of AIDS experience have taught me to pay attention to. Signs that both make me cautious, but that also give me hope. And I want to urge you to be cautious and hopeful simultaneously as part of your Advent spirituality. AIDS teaches us both. Wake up! Don't give up. Wake up! You're not done. Pay attention. If you have just a little bit of life left, that life can be meaningful. How many times did I learn this from the people that I ministered to in the 80s when we did not have protease, when we did not have even ACT in doses that we understood how to take, right? So if you were in an AIDS church or in an AIDS group in the 80s, you'll remember this. Beepers going off every 4 hours to remind people to take their AZT. So if we were in church like right now, at the MCC church in San Francisco, already probably 3 or 4 beepers would have gone off at different times to remind people to take their AZT pills because they had to take them constantly. As it turned out later, people were taking way too much, but they didn't know that. And they scared you half to death. If you took it a minute too late, you were mutating. We used to joke about it. A beeper would go off. A minute later, someone would say, take your pill, you're mutating. And we made a joke of this because what could we do? We wanted 1 more minute of life. 1 more minute, 2 more minutes, 5 more minutes. It was worth it. When time is measured, the extra time is valuable. So, the extra time you have is valuable. It's worth it. It's worth living for. And it teaches you a vigilance and awareness. Time is not to be wasted. Not that I'm not capable of wasting time like anybody, or that other people weren't too. I don't want to romanticize it. But it does teach you vigilance. These are the signs that I'm seeing that I never thought I would see, some of them are causing me to be vigilant, and some are causing me to want to live larger life. Here's one. A month ago, Representative Betty Price in Georgia. Do you remember this? You may have missed it in the news. She is a doctor, unbelievably, and she said this in a hearing about health budget in Georgia, being briefed about increasing HIV statistics in Georgia, which are largely affecting African American people. One statistic from the CDC, 1 in 2 gay black men currently alive in the United States are likely to become HIV infected in their lifetime. I don't care what you are hearing about AIDS being over. It is not over. It's who has AIDS that is causing there to be less concern or less engagement. People that people in power think aren't worth saving. All right? So, Representative Betty Price, you may have recalled that her husband lost his job in the Trump administration after a very short period in office for abusing transportation privileges. But Dr. Price, when hearing of the increasing statistics in the HIV community in Georgia, said, I don't want to say the quarantine word, but I guess I just said it. What would you advise, or are there any methods legally that we could do that would curtail the spread? And she went on to say, because these people with AIDS are living longer now, we have to think about whether we could quarantine them. She could have said this, wow, people with HIV are living longer, and there's more HIV. That must mean there must be more stigma, and maybe we could spend more money on people who are poor who don't have insurance. But that's not what she said. We haven't heard people talk about quarantining people with HIV in the United States for 30 years. But I remember what they did before. It's bad science, it's bad public health. And this happened a month ago, and there has not been widespread public outcry about it. Pay attention to the signs. It should make us anxious and vigilant, and also call us to solidarity. This week, I don't mean to pick on the South. I did live and work in the South for a brief time, and Pastor Cody back here is an expert on the South. But this past week, Reverend, what's wrong with me? Judge Roy Moore, our friend, the Senate candidate now in Alabama, explained to a group of people while he was speaking in a church who is responsible for the attacks on him right now, accusing him of sexual harassment of teenage girls. He said, they're liberals. They're gays, bisexuals, transgenders, gays, lesbians, bisexual, transgenders. And then he went on to say, and socialists and humanists. So, first of all, somehow we've succeeded. We've gotten our opponents to learn to say gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. How cool is that? okay, progress in small things, and then lumped us together with socialists and humanists. Would that we would live up to this critique. But we need to be vigilant that people like Moore speaking in churches to approval of the people in the audience are making these connections and blaming us for this. And it should galvanize us to solidarity, to connections, to make the same connections he's making, and to say we are standing in solidarity with each other. We will not put up with this. On World AIDS Day, it should evoke in us a sense of commitment. See, it's the same information. It could depress us or it could inspire us. But the key is paying attention, to watch, as Jesus says. Stay awake. Don't ignore it, what's unfolding around you. I'm trying to put to use in my personal life what I've learned from over 20 years of living with AIDS, almost 25 now. And I'm so proud to be doing this service with Alan. Between us, we can say a half century of living with and surviving AIDS. How cool is that? Here's one last example I want to give of what I'm trying to do around paying attention to what I've learned in a meaningful way and turn it into a sign of hope and being willing to apply critique to myself in the same way. You know what I learned at MCC about solidarity? In the 90s at our general conference, I remember this, when our friends from other countries could not come to general conference because you were not allowed to come into the United States if you had HIV. Do you remember this? Maybe you don't remember this. So at the Los Angeles General Conference in '97, I think, we took 700 people to the INS, which was what ICE used to be, office in downtown Los Angeles. 700, and had a big protest there as part of our general conference. And this is before people were having protests like this about immigration issues. Only gay people ever protested the AIDS ban, I'll say that. But you didn't see gay people protesting, you don't see gay people in large numbers protesting right now around immigration either, about what's unfolding. But I remember this, MCC, 700 people at the INS office protesting that our friends could not come into the country because they had HIV. It's barbaric. Doesn't that embarrass you as an American? It should embarrass all of us. And then I remember in Calgary at our general conference in 2005 or 6 or 7, several hundred of us, one day, for a day, wore big HIV plus t-shirts for a whole day, walked around downtown Calgary. And more people put on stickers. Not everyone wanted to wear the t-shirt because it didn't fit them fashion-wise. But they were willing to wear stickers that just said HIV positive. So it was several hundred people for a day, most of them not HIV positive. Did this in solidarity to have the experience not only to change other people, but to see how it would change themselves. Can you imagine that? It was very cool. So the church I'm the pastor of right now is dealing with this question about whether or not to let an evangelical church meet in it. We're an open and affirming congregation, not making light of it. It's a complicated question. Because it's an open and affirming church. We don't want people to think, by even having an evangelical church meeting in our building, that gay people might not be welcome there. Also, some of the gay people don't want even evangelical church in the building. I pastored an MCC church in Glendale that was without a meeting space for weeks at a time because we couldn't find a darn church to let us meet in it. We lost our space because an evangelical church bought the building we were meeting in, and we lost our space. And I went from church to church to church, and it was liberal churches that wouldn't let us meet in them. Okay? It was called City of Angels MCC. That was just in the early 2000s. So I know what it's like to be in that situation. I'm telling you this because right now I'm grappling with, I don't feel good about, I don't feel a sense of, revenge. Now the tide has turned, the tables have turned. Actually, I feel pretty cruddy about being the one with the power and the privilege, being able to say no, even though I understand why. I'm trying to apply what I learned from my being the one that was prejudiced against in a meaningful way to my current situation. And that's where the words of Jesus get real. When Jesus says, pay attention. It's not just pay attention to others and point fingers. It means, do you want me to be born in your heart again on Christmas Eve? That it means being willing to pay attention to yourself and ask yourself, are you preparing a place for me? Is there room for me? Because I am the person you don't want. What have you learned, Jim, about prejudice? What have you learned? So I don't know if this is useful to you, but I always think it's important, if you're going to ask difficult questions, to be willing to apply them to yourself too. And that's what I've been doing spiritually. I want Christmas this year like I never have before. I want Jesus to be born in my heart. I want there to be room there. And I don't want to be the one saying, no room. And I'm inviting you to do whatever it takes to make room for a new beginning. Make room for the Word made flesh to be born inside you. And to make room for the one whose coming is certain to find a place in your heart.